Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and Mega Man 2, Rockman World 2 in Japan, for the Game Boy is a bizarre title. 4 out of the 5 for that system were created by one studio, but the one behind the second entry, Biox, only got to play around with the series once. I guess back then, Capcom was still finding their footing with the whole farm the handheld adaptations out so we can concentrate on the mainline titles thing. And the results this time were, like I said, bizarre. Which feels weird to say, since this one does follow the conventions of the series, combining 2 NES titles, in this case 2 and 3, with an original boss and Wily machine thrown in. Yet, even with the majority of the work already done, the results still feel off. Let me explain what I mean. Dr. Wily's super depressed, so he does the only logical thing and steals a time machine from the Space-Time Research Laboratory, travels to the future so he can kidnap Mega Man, and modifies him to suit his own evil plans. When investigating, Dr. Light and Rush discover that Wily is up to something again, so present-day Mega Man is sent out to take care of it. This plot is dumb as hell. I mean, most time travel stories are, and a lot of thought isn't typically put into classic storylines, especially the Game Boy entries, but this one still really bugs me. Luckily, the account is a little more complete on the wiki than in the complete works, which feels ironic, since there it's actually explained that the reason Wily is able to kidnap Future Rock is because he's achieved peace and has been turned back into a civilian robot, making him an easy target. That still doesn't get rid of the other problem though, that in order for this future to come to pass, Wily needs to lose so many times to Mega Man that he either gives up or dies in order for Rock to go back to Lab Assistant, meaning Quint has to lose here. And if they ever figure out that Quint is evil future Mega Man, wouldn't they just go ahead and never turn Mega Man back into simply Rock if they knew that past Wily was just gonna go forward to enact this plot? If I were Mega Man, I'd still have a sense of existential dread, wondering if I'd change the timeline enough to avoid my fate. I guess we could always be going off of Dragon Ball logic, one of the few to get time travel right, where the altered set of events just becomes its own separate timeline, though I'm still not giving World 2 a pass. Further mucking things up is the ending, where Mega Man just straight up kills Wily. While it's funny how casually they do this, it still feels like the sort of thing that shouldn't be canon, so we should probably just pretend this one never happened. No wait, it'd be fine if the one killed was future Wily and present Wily was still around? Other than Mega Man not being allowed to harm humans due to the laws of robotics? Okay, this game is fine as long as Quint is future Trunks and Mega Man just shot Wily in space, causing him to tumble down to Earth and land in a silly cartoon explosion where he came out of the wreckage a blackened mess, coughing smoke before shaking his fist and saying, "I'll get you next time, Mega Man." Seriously, did Capcom proofread this? The slide has been added back in, since one of the games this pulls from is Mega Man 3, and likewise, the Rush supports are back. Coil and Jet function like they do in 3, so busted. And Marine is largely the same, except you can't jump out of water with it, and when it bumps into something, you bounce off. You need to unlock all 3 by clearing levels, not even Coil is free. Other basic mechanic stuff, the dot grid is back for passwords, you can carry up to 4 E-tanks at a time, and there's this weird feature where sometimes when you get hit on a ladder, you actually get pushed up rather than knocked down. As for the weapons, they're mostly the same. Metal Blade still fires in 8 directions with good ammo consumption. Crash Bombs either latch onto a surface, then explode, or just deal damage if you hit an enemy directly, and Air Shooter fires out a set of mini twisters that arc upwards. Wood Shield is better though, you being able to run around with it, and it being able to take more damage. You can just kinda sit on Airman with it. For the second half, Magnet Missiles still fly out and turn towards enemies vertically, Needle Cannon still fires needles, and Hard Knuckles still come out slow but hit hard. Top Spin is pretty much the same, but its spin is a bit more noticeable now, which I'd say is an improvement. And if you beat Quint, you get Sakugarne, which is a weaponized pogo stick with eyes. Like the Rush Jet, it consumes ammo as you ride it. You can use it to jump high or move over spikes. I think. The wiki said you could. Okay, there we go. You can also damage enemies by jumping on top of them, but it doesn't negate your hurt box, so if you don't take out whatever you're attacking, you'll take damage yourself. Great! I could see this being really cool, letting you leapfrog off some smaller enemies in some places, but you get it so late in the game that that's going to be pretty unlikely. Also kind of annoying how it's the weakness for the final boss, but trying to use it against him is kind of self-destructive. They designed one new weapon for this game and it's a dud. I'll also mention that it's kind of weird that they put in both weapons that break walls, Crash Bomb and Hard Knuckle, and yet I don't think they put in any of said breakable walls to use them on. The stages are weird. I mean, most of the elements are there. Metal Man has conveyor belts, spiked presses, pine cones, and clowns on wheels. Woodman has a bunch of robot animals, though there's also an underground lake with some of Needleman's obstacles to justify the inclusion of Rush Marine. Crashman, you still have a tower, though you climb up and down, with moving platforms and the pod enemies spawning in. Airman, you still have the Oni platforms, clouds, birds, and fanboys. The way they're put together, though, feel off. Metal Man has a part near the beginning where you have to just jump down to a lower screen where you can just land in spikes, no warning. There are just power-ups, sitting around in weird locations that require no skill, powers, or planning to get. Enemy placement feels really not thought out. Sometimes they'll be in spots that feel really unfair, with no way to really avoid them. Then there's others in odd spots where I have to wonder, why bother? And you get disappearing blocks, which are more like disappearing bricks, in endgame, but since you're guaranteed to have Rush Jet by then and they're really the only thing you need the Rush supports for at that point, there's really no reason to engage with them. And actually, there's even a few disappearing blocks that you can just skip without any special powers. After you beat the first 4 stages, you get the boss rush, which isn't really a boss rush. Instead, you get 4 capsules that take you into full-fledged stages. Fight your way to the end, beat the boss, and get their weapon. Really, this is just the second stage select. The difference being that you don't know who you're choosing going into it, and your weapons don't refresh in between. Hardman still has the bear traps, but you can't slide under the Hammer Joe's attacks, and the ceiling baboons take a lot of damage. Magnet Man has all his stage enemies, but also contains those disappearing block sections that I just recommend you don't bother with. Needleman's is pretty much just Needleman's, just with a different layout. Top Man's has a water section now, and I also just skipped the top platforms near the end because why not, as well as some incredibly stupid enemy placement. Like, look at this part. 2 ways down, so you'd think that the one being guarded by the tanky cat enemy would net you something nice, but nope. Just skipping the tabby actually puts you in a better position to waste this guy, then grab the tank. The last stage is made of clocks and the Roman numeral 2, and it's just kind of a hodgepodge of everything. Disappearing blocks, a variety of enemies, sometimes placed incompetently, bunch of different obstacles, and even a short water section. Really, it just feels like one of those custom, fan-made, throw everything at the wall levels, rather than one officially published by Capcom. Only the time theme setting it apart. And that pretty much sums up the whole set. They have everything you'd expect from a Mega Man game, but with no understanding for how to put them together in a way that works. Still need to get around to messing with Mega Man Maker, so I can't compare it to that, but I am still reminded of Mario Maker, where you get stages that are thrown together so haphazardly that you get the impression that the one who made it had no sense of game design. Which is not something I should be saying about an official spin-off. Okay, so for the regular stages we have Metal Man, Woodman, Airman, and original boss, Clash Man. For the boss rush, there's Hard, Magnet, Top, and Needle Man. The situation is similar to the last Game Boy title. The fights are pretty much the same, but in a smaller arena, making them harder to dodge, with some weaknesses being changed due to game format. A few are a little different, like you can shoot between the sections of Woodman's Leaf Shield with your Buster, and did Crashman's bombs always reflect shots? And I also like how the boss is just waiting for you when you go through the gate. They don't pop in from the ceiling, they're just standing there, staring you down, which somehow makes them look even more ticked off, like they're saying, "Took you long enough." The big difference, though, between this and Dr. Wily's Revenge is that you seem to outdamage bosses, even with your Buster, so skill and prep are a lot less important. About the only one to give me any trouble was Flashman, and I'm not sure if he took less damage or if I just had more trouble hitting him. But the rest, even if it felt like I was taking too many hits, I would still manage to come out on top, as long as I came in with the bulk of my health. As for the original bosses, I don't even know why they bothered with Quint. He doesn't have a health bar, you just kinda have to wail on him. Not that that should be a problem, he just hops around on his pogo stick, tosses up rocks, then jumps again. He's really easy to avoid, and even if he manages to hit you, you'd have to mess up a lot to lose. His weakness is hard knuckle, but I typically just shoot him in the face with the buster. You fight him after the boss rush, and I don't think he's ever managed to beat me. Wily's kind of interesting though. He has 3 forms this time. Though for the first 2, he ditches the main body and swaps his cockpit over to another machine before you can finish taking out his health bar. Kind of just hitting the eject button before you can win. First form is a walker that hops around, throws out bouncing bombs, and shoots off its toenail. Second is a tank that fires off energy balls, does the bouncing bomb again but now they explode and send out projectiles, and also moves back and forth across the screen. Final throws out sets of bombs you need to weave between, while also shooting off slow-moving missiles with a bigger hitbox than you might expect. The cockpit is the weakness for all of them. Even the final form, where the skull chest piece is the bit that flashes. If you win, you get an extra special weapon, the missiles that he fires, which you just use in the following cutscene to waste Wily. Really, the only challenge with this is just how long the fight is, 3 forms back to back. This is one of the few places where I'll actually use E-tanks, but since it is one of the only spots to make me do so, I tend to have more than enough. I do kinda like this fight, just because of how goofy it is, and it probably is the highlight of the game, since Robot Masters don't deviate too much, and Quint is lame. Extremely, incredibly lame. Boo, Quint! There's a few different options for the visuals, depending on what hardware you're using. Green for original Game Boy, which I forgot about last time, gray for Pocket, color for color, and more color options for Super Game Boy, which I never had. The first 3 are all available on Nintendo Switch Online, which I imagine is how most people will play this one. As for specifics, the levels look a bit better, them retaining a lot of their elements from the NES games. The environments felt a lot more random in Dr. Wily's Revenge, but maybe since 2 and 3 had a little more going on visually, each stage actually fits the theme it's aiming for, rather than just having nondescript sci-fi. As for the characters, Mega Man and the bosses look pretty much how they previously did, just smaller with different coloration. When it comes to the enemies, some are the same, others feel a little squished and off. I really noticed this when I first started playing it, particularly with the Oni heads, magnet drones, and some of Rush's forms. I thought it might have to do with the filter I was using since it stopped bugging me when I turned it off, and comparing the footage, things do look a little sharper without, but the general sizes are still pretty much the same, so I might have just gotten used to it. I also want to make a special note of Wily. Cramped in his cockpit, he seems so small that, if he got out, it looks like Mega Man would tower over him. I don't really mind though, since with how all Wily's projectiles have goofy cartoon eyes plastered on them, it kind of enhances how silly the boss is. End of the day, I'd say that this is probably the worst looking of the Game Boy titles, though if you focus on the levels, you could make an argument for the first. Still, while lesser, I don't think visuals are going to be the biggest turnoff here, so don't worry about them too much. Surprisingly, despite how much this game borrows from the NES titles, the soundtrack is original. That's right, the stuff I've been playing in the background isn't me trying to launch my music career or promote some unknown indie chiptune band. It's actually what you hear in-game. Which is a shame, since even if you're the type to think that Mega Man 2 and 3 are overrated, I think most people would at least agree that the soundtracks for each were pretty damn good. But no, we get this really bizarre set of songs instead. Did get excited when I got to the first Weapon Get screen, since it starts out like the one from 3, but it pretty quickly betrayed those expectations. It's worth mentioning that there was some sort of coding error that made the tracks higher pitched than they were supposed to be, which is why it sounds so screechy. I did find a pitch-corrected version of the OST, which definitely sounds better, and a few do sound a bit more in line with actual Mega Man music, but even then, this is definitely one of the weakest in the series. The only 2 tracks I liked going into it were the title theme, which they bring back for the final stage, thank goodness, and Airmans. The rest did start to grow on me after a while, I guess proving that Stockholm Syndrome is real and someone should probably call my parents and tell them to pay the ransom. I wouldn't go out of my way to listen to this one, and you should probably lower your expectations going into it. I say that, but you'll probably hear the full OST by the time I'm done, so you should know exactly what to expect. You'd think, due to the smaller screen, the bizarre level design, and the boss rush actually being 4 levels stacked on top of each other, that World 2 would be a pretty tough game, but this is actually one of the easiest classic titles I've ever played. And I played most of them. Part of it's just how long your health lasts, so that even when you're put into situations where you really don't have the room to dodge, you can just tank a lot of hits. This is especially true of the bosses, where you can outdamage most of them. Part of it's how overpowered some of the weapons are. Giving you the Metal Blade back can really break things, and part of it is the return of the Rush supports, which are just as busted as they were back in NES 3. I think the biggest thing, though, is just how slapdash the levels are put together, making it so that there's not really a competent challenge here. Normally, this sort of thing would instead create a lot of frustration, developers not understanding how to do the challenging but fair thing, but here, you can tank damage, just ignore enemies and obstacles, and pick up random power-ups left lying around that require absolutely no skill to get. That's not to say that there aren't some harder bits. Clashman is one of the few bosses that seem harder to take down here than they were on the NES. Maybe he really is a different guy. And it's rough having 3 back-to-back Wily fights where you can only plink him, unless you're gutsy enough to use the self-destructive weakness against him. Though the random E-tanks that you collected up till then should help with both. There's also a few sections where you can just die because you couldn't see the hazards you were jumping down onto. Still, I slammed through this in about an hour on stream, and then on my follow-up solo run, I not only didn't bother with save states, I didn't even game over once. At this point it takes me 30 to 40 minutes. Veteran players will likely destroy this game, and newer ones will probably just be very confused. I promise, Mega Man's normally not this weird. Keiji Inafune stated that Rockman World 2 really taught them the importance of getting a company that understood the series to work on the Gameboy titles, so it's no surprise that Capcom went back to Minakuchi Engineering for the rest of them after that. And saying that Biox didn't understand Mega Man definitely is the simplest way to describe this game. The ingredients for a proper classic title are all there, but none of it feels quite right. It's like if I gave you the material to bake a cake, you gave me back something that looked like an amateurish reproduction of the stock image, yet somehow wound up tasting like a spicy quesadilla, with a weird, extra flavor that made even that taste a bit off. Does that make sense, or am I bad at metaphors? World 2 should have been set to be the best in the series, it pulling from Mega Man 2 and 3, the favorites. But not only did they scrap the soundtracks, they couldn't even adapt the bits that they did keep properly. It is immensely disappointing, and yet, I can't help but be kinda fascinated by it. How do you take a job that is largely copy-pasting from a highly regarded set of projects and get things so wrong? I would actually recommend Mega Man 2 for Game Boy, not because it's good, but because it's the sort of thing you have to see for yourself. It's not very hard, and it's not very long. So as long as you have access to the game through NSO or otherwise, it's very low investment. And playing it will make you really appreciate what makes competent platformers so good, especially in the classic series. That sums up my thoughts on it, but what about you? Have you played this one? Does it hold value as a lesson in game design? Is it utter trash? Or do you maybe consider it a hidden gem? Did you finally give it a try on Switch? Do you have some other method of playing it? Or is there a system that you'd like to see it ported to in the future? Should I continue to swap between filters while reviewing these games, or just pick a color and stick with it? And we can all agree that Quint sucks and this one probably shouldn't be considered canon, right? That'll do it for this week, so thanks as always for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into platformers, especially Mega Man. If I'm kidnapped from the future, I need to get killed by myself in the past, otherwise I can't become evil in the present. Is that how that goes?